In the tobacco fields of colonial Maryland, beneath the rolling hills of Anne Arundel County, lies a secret so disturbing that the Catholic Church has spent over 2 centuries trying to erase it from history. Between 1734 and 1768, 12 parishes across the colony fell under the control of a family whose name still makes elderly parishioners cross themselves in fear. The Thornton family didn't just serve God. They played God using the act of confession to build an empire of fear. That makes today's organized crime look like a schoolyard prank. What you're about to hear comes from secret church files. Coded journals found in a farmhouse wall in 1892, and witness stories that were hidden for nearly 300 years. This isn't just another church scandal. This is the story of how 3 men used the confessional booth to control a whole colony using blackmail, poison, and the worst abuse of trust ever recorded in U.S. history. Before we keep going with the story of the Thornton family and their creepy church scheme, I just want to ask you something. This channel's not for everyone, only for the folks brave enough to hear the dark stuff history tried to hide. If you think you're one of them, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. And hey, drop a comment to tell me what city or state you're watching from. Are you brave enough to say where you're from while we dive into this creepy tale together? Okay, let's head back to Maryland in 1734, where evil wore a priest's collar. In the fall of 1734, colonial Maryland was in a tight spot, stuck between Protestant and Catholic tensions. It was a religious war zone where the Calvert families, Catholic power, still ruled, even as Anglicans tried to take over. In this mess, the little port town of Havenwood, sitting by the Severn River around 20 miles from Annapolis, stood for everything the Catholic Church wanted to save in the New World. Havenwood wasn't big, maybe 800 people total, spread across tobacco farms and small shops. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in power. The Catholic families there ran most of the tobacco trade in Chesapeake Bay, with their names on shipping lists from London all the way to the Caribbean. The Curthers owned 3 plantations and a bunch of trading ships. The Whitmores ran the biggest tobacco warehouse between Baltimore and Annapolis. And the Ashfords made their fortune in tobacco, and though no one talked about it, the very profitable slave trade. Right in the center of this Catholic town stood St. Bartholomew's Church, a small brick building with a bell tower you could see from boats coming down the Severn River. It wasn't like the big fancy churches in Europe. St. Bartholomew was built for colonial life, strong oak pews, simple windows, and thick walls to handle the hot Maryland summers and pirates who still sailed around the bay. But the real trouble was inside those walls. In late summer 1734, Father Thomas Thornton showed up as the new priest. And right away, he had a weird request. He wanted to put in new confession booths, not 1 or 2, but 4 big, fancy wooden ones that he said would help with the growing number of people in the church. Father Thornton wasn't what folks expected in a priest. He was tall, almost 6 feet, with gray hair and sharp blue eyes. He had a fancy European accent, like someone who'd gone to school overseas. But the way he acted, it was like he understood rough colonial life better than most church guys. And even when he smiled, it never really reached his eyes. Now what nobody at St. Bartholomew knew was this: Father Thornton had spent the last 5 years traveling around Maryland, visiting Catholic churches and quietly checking out which families had money, power, and the kinds of secrets they didn't want exposed. He wasn't there to save souls. He came to collect secrets. The booths he brought in were beautifully made. His nephew Marcus built them, said to be trained in carpentry from Philadelphia. Each booth looked normal on the outside: a middle seat for the priest and 2 side spots for people to kneel and confess. Dark oak wood and detailed cross carvings made them look holy and fancy. But hidden inside each one was something sneaky. Marcus had built tiny metal tubes that went from each kneeling spot down into a hidden room under the church. These tubes, made of tin and bent just right, carried sound clearly down into the basement. The setup down there was simple but clever. The tubes led into metal-lined echo boxes that made the whispers louder. Anyone sitting below could hear every confession like they were in the booth too, but Father Thornton didn't stop there. He trained his younger nephew Samuel to write down all the confessions using a secret code he'd made up himself. He started keeping records of everything people said during confession. Their first target walked into their trap on a cold morning in February 1735, though he had no idea. This setup had been ready for 6 months. His name was Richard Whitmore, a top tobacco trader in Havenwood known for being super religious and always donating big to the church. People thought he was the perfect Catholic businessman, honest, fair, and respected by everyone. But Richard had a secret that could destroy all of that. 3 months before, while doing business in Annapolis, he met a young woman named Catherine Mills. She was an indentured servant who worked in the tavern where he often stayed during business trips. Catherine was 19, beautiful in a way that made men forget their vows, and stuck in an indenture contract that wouldn't end for another 4 years. What started as small talk turned into something the church called a serious sin adultery. As Whitmore knelt in the confessional that February morning, his voice low and shaky, he told Father Thornton everything, full of guilt. He talked about feeling ashamed, how he had betrayed his wife Margaret and broken his holy marriage vows. He said the relationship with Catherine was still going on, and he planned to buy out her contract. He was scared the affair would be found out and ruin his family's name. Father Thornton listened calmly, like a kind priest, saying nice words and promising God's forgiveness for those who truly repent. He told Whitmore to say some prayers and give money to charity, then blessed him as Whitmore left, crying with relief. But down in the basement of St. Bartholomew, Samuel Thornton wrote down every word of Whitmore's confession, using the special code his uncle had taught him. The young man's handwriting was neat and exact, as he wrote details that would soon turn into blackmail. Catherine Mills, indentured servant at the Brass Lantern Tavern in Annapolis. Contract holder, Jonathan Pierce. Relationship ongoing since November 1734. Whitmore plans to purchase indenture within the month. The shift from holy confession to blackmail began 1 week later. Father Thornton asked to meet Whitmore privately, saying he had something very important to discuss. They met in the priest's study on a Thursday night, the room lit only by candles, their shadows moving across the walls full of holy books. "Richard," Father Thornton said warmly, "I've been praying a lot about our talk last week, and God showed me a way to help ease your burden." Whitmore leaned in, hopeful that his priest had a solution to his problem. "The church has a lot of costs coming soon," Father Thornton said. "We're thinking about doing more charity, maybe starting a fund to help servants, especially young women in tough situations." He paused for a moment, just enough for Whitmore to understand what was being said. "I think God wants you to give a big gift to that fund, maybe £50 to start, and £10 every month after that. It would prove your repentance and help others like Miss Mills." Whitmore's face went pale as he realized what was happening. Father Thornton had remembered every part of his confession, and now he was using it to ask for money. The priest's friendly look didn't change, but Whitmore saw something cold in those blue eyes. "Father, our talk was under confession," he said. "And it still is," Father Thornton replied gently. "I'd never break that sacred trust. But God talks to me in other ways, Richard, through prayer, through signs, and He showed me your wish to help young Catherine. I'm just giving you a holy way to do that good deed." Whitmore sat in silence, his mind working fast like a businessman. £50 was a lot, but he could pay it. £10 every month would be harder, but still possible. The other option? If the affair got out, it would destroy his marriage, his business ties, and his place in the community. "And if I give to this charity fund, ... "Then God," said Father Thornton, "will bless your privacy in your personal matters. The church is always a safe place for people who want to live right away from gossip and nosy neighbors." Whitmore agreed to pay, telling himself it was real charity that could help other young women in trouble. He didn't know he was the first of what would become hundreds of victims, or that his confession had been the test run for a blackmail system that would soon cover all of Maryland. That night, as Whitmore walked through Havenwood's quiet streets, he felt a chill that wasn't just from the cold wind. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, like he had stepped over an invisible line and couldn't go back. Behind him, the church's bell tower stood tall against the starry sky, like a dark finger pointing toward heaven. Or maybe pointing somewhere else. The success with Whitmore showed Father Thornton that his plan could work and make even more money than he thought. In the months that followed, he moved into the next step, a full expansion that would turn Maryland's churches into his own secret criminal network. The key to growing the operation was in his two nephews, both trained for this exact job. Marcus, the older one at 28, was skilled at building the tricky confessionals. Samuel, just 21, had been trained since he was a kid to write fast and use codes. What made this plan so evil was that both young men were real Catholic priests. They had gone to seminary in Baltimore, paid for and guided by their uncle. By spring 1735, Father Thornton got his nephews jobs at new churches. Marcus went to St. Michael's in the port town of Easton. Samuel took over St. Joseph's, a struggling church in the tobacco farming area near Chestertown. Each of them made the same request: to install new confessional booths that would better serve the people in their church. The expansion plan was slow and careful. Instead of trying to blackmail every person who confessed a secret, the Thorntons focused only on what they called useful sins, sins done by people who were rich enough to pay big money and who had good reputations that would be ruined if exposed. Adultery was perfect, but they also looked for embezzling, tax cheating, shady business stuff, and the usual corruption found in colonial trade. Their way of staying in touch was just as clever as their trick confessionals. Using a web of merchant friends and traveling salesmen, the three priests sent each other coded letters. The letters looked like they talked about normal church work, but they actually shared private info about new targets and their secrets. A letter saying there was a spiritual awakening among tobacco farmers could really mean that some plantation owners had confessed to tax fraud. A message asking for more prayer books for the women's group might really be about a rich widow who admitted to sleeping with her farm overseer. By the end of 1735, the Thornton network was making good money from 12 regular victims across 3 parishes. Richard Whitmore was still their best source. His monthly payments had gone up to £15, since Father Thornton told him the church needed more money for good causes. But Whitmore's case taught the Thorntons an important trick. Instead of just asking for money to keep secrets, Father Thornton gave his victims a fancy reason to feel good about paying. The money was called charity, penance, or donations for church projects. That way, the victims could see themselves as kind people, not poor folks getting blackmailed. It helped them feel better and kept them from fighting back. This clever plan worked best with Edmund Curthers, a rich plantation owner who ran a big shipping business in the Chesapeake Bay. Curthers had told the priest that he always underreported how much stuff he shipped so he wouldn't have to pay full taxes. It was common, but still counted as treason, and he could lose everything if caught. When Father Thornton asked Curthers to give a large donation to help poor people, Curthers said no at first. But then the priest gently reminded him that God sees everything, even shady business done in dark corners. That was all it took. Within 6 months, Curthers was giving £25 every month, thinking the money was helping poor Catholic families. In Maryland, as time passed, the victims began to break down. Richard Whitmore, once cheerful and outgoing, became quiet and nervous. He started going to church every day, like he thought praying more might erase his guilt. His wife Margaret saw the change, but thought it was just work stress or deeper. Faith Curthers had different problems. He was always good with records, but now he spent hours at night reading old shipping logs and letters, like he was checking for mistakes. His slaves said he'd sometimes wake up at night and go check cargo that had already been looked over many times. But the scariest change happened inside the churches. The Thornton priests had turned their parishes into places where fear and guilt ran wild. Their sermons were full of scary warnings about hidden sins, punishment from God, and the need to confess every little thing. They told people to come confess every week and warned them they'd go to hell if they didn't. All this pressure made people pour out everything in the confessionals, not just big sins, but tiny mistakes, bad thoughts, and business deals they weren't proud of. The Thorntons' notebooks filled up with secrets, like a massive list of blackmail info on Maryland's most powerful families. By early 1736, Father Thornton was ready for the next big move. He wanted to spread this plan across Maryland and maybe even into nearby colonies. He picked out 16 more parishes where he thought this system would work. He also started looking for more family members and close friends he could teach to run the confessional setup. But there was a big problem. The Catholic leaders in Baltimore were starting to notice that the Thorntons were building strange things in their churches. Bishop Carroll had asked why small churches needed such fancy confessionals, and there were whispers he might start checking the churches personally. The solution Father Thornton came up with would be both his greatest trick and the thing that would lead to his downfall. It involved corruption so deep it would shake the power of the Catholic Church in colonial Maryland, and it would push the Thorntons across a line they could never uncross. In the winter of 1736, a surprise problem came up that would test the strength of the Thornton plan. A young woman named Isabella Ashford, the daughter of one of Havenwood's most powerful Catholic families, started to feel like something was wrong with the way confessions worked at St. Bartholomew. Isabella was 19 and very smart, the kind of girl colonial society didn't know what to do with, but couldn't fully stop. She had private tutors, spoke French and Latin, and had become really interested in Catholic beliefs by reading all the religious books in her father's library. This smart brain of hers would become Father Thornton's first big mistake. The fall before, Isabella had told Father Thornton she had been secretly reading books that the church said young, unmarried women shouldn't be reading, especially some philosophy books. She had been reading some books that questioned church authority. It wasn't a big deal by colonial rules, but Father Thornton saw a way to take control of the Ashford family's money. 2 weeks after she confessed, Isabella noticed that Father Thornton started saying things in his sermons about young women messing up their minds with dangerous ideas. Then he asked to meet her father privately to talk about the spiritual troubles of young people in the church. That's when Isabella's guesses started to feel like real proof. But Isabella Ashford wasn't the type to just guess and do nothing. She wanted to find out the truth for herself. She used the skills she had picked up from her years of studying books. She started keeping track of which church members were being called in to speak privately with Father Thornton and tried to match those meetings with what she knew they had confessed before. She watched to see which families suddenly started giving more money to the church, and she tried to figure out what sins they might have admitted that made them so generous. The biggest part of Isabella's plan was testing Father Thornton directly. She made up fake confessions and watched what happened next. She said she stole small things from shops in town, pretended to have crushes on married men, and even lied about reading Protestant books from her Anglican neighbors. Every time, she paid close attention to see if Father Thornton used those made-up stories to get her family to act a certain way. After she said she borrowed a silk handkerchief from Whitmore's store, Father Thornton's next sermon was all about people who take things that don't belong to them. Even little things. When she lied about liking a married tobacco trader, Father Thornton started telling her dad it was important to find Isabella a proper husband before her womanly weaknesses got her into trouble. But the fake confession that really scared her was the one about her family's business. She told Father Thornton that she had overheard her dad talking about skipping taxes on a shipment from Europe by pretending it was religious stuff, which didn't need to be taxed. It was a total lie. Her father was completely honest in business, but just days later, Father Thornton asked to meet James Ashford to talk about how shady business deals could ruin a man's soul. That's when Isabella realized something terrifying. Father Thornton was using private confessions to blackmail people, but that wasn't even the worst of it. She also found out that this scheme was happening in more than one church. She quietly asked around among her friends in Annapolis and Baltimore, and she found out that other Catholic churches had also built those weird fancy confessional booths. Recently, when she brought up the names Marcus and Samuel Thornton, a pattern started to show up. It looked like this whole thing was one big plan run by the Thornton family, hiding behind religion. With this information, Isabella did something that most women back then would never dream of doing. She decided to confront Father Thornton face to face. She asked to meet with him and pretended it was about her engagement to Jonathan Pierce, a young businessman from Annapolis that her parents had picked as a husband. The meeting was set for a Thursday night in late February 1737. In Father Thornton's study next to the church, he welcomed Isabella with his usual fake kindness, gave her some tea, and said how happy he was about her engagement. But Isabella wasn't there for chit-chat. "Father Thornton," she said with a calm and steady voice, "I think you've been using people's confessions to make money through blackmail." Father Thornton's friendly look stayed the same, but Isabella noticed his body tense up just a little. She had hit a nerve. "My dear child," he said sweetly, "I think you're just stressed about getting married. That kind of worry can make your mind think strange things. Why don't we talk about it in confession, and I'll give you some good spiritual advice." "I'm not here to confess anything," Isabella said flatly. "I want you to tell me why your sermons keep mentioning the same sins that people talk to you about in private. I want you to tell me why families that confess certain sins suddenly get asked to donate more money, and I want you to explain why your confessional booths are so strangely built." That's when Father Thornton finally dropped his fake smile. There was something cold and sneaky in his face now, and when he spoke again, his voice had a quiet threat in it that made Isabella's skin crawl. "Miss Ashford," he said, "you're starting to believe dangerous ideas. Ideas that could cause your family big trouble if too many people heard them. You should really focus on your wedding and let the trained people worry about church stuff." Isabella stood up to leave, but then Father Thornton said something that made her stop right at the door. "I'm sure this conversation will stay between us. Your family has such a perfect reputation in this town. It would be a real shame if that reputation got ruined because someone spread lies about a holy priest." As Isabella walked back home through the dark streets of Havenwood, she knew two things for sure. Father Thornton was absolutely guilty, and now she was in danger. His last words weren't just a warning, they were a threat. Do what he wants, or watch her family's name fall apart. But Isabella Ashford wasn't about to be scared off by a corrupt priest. She had studied theology and philosophy for years, and she didn't do all that just to be bullied into silence. She had a plan, a risky plan that could either take down the whole Thornton blackmail ring or ruin her completely, and she was ready for either one, because doing the right thing mattered more than protecting herself. Now, all she needed was help, some clever thinking, and people she could trust to keep her secret safe while she worked to destroy the Thornton network from the inside out. She had found the crime, figured out how they did it, and even faced one of the men behind it. Now she needed proof, real proof that would make the leaders of the Catholic Church step in and stop the Thornton group, and she needed it fast, before Father Thornton could do whatever he was planning as payback. The key to getting that proof was to get into the basement under St. Bartholomew, where she believed they had their secret recording set up. Isabella had studied the church building for years, going there all the time. And now she remembered little things that suddenly seemed creepy. A basement door that was always locked, strange echoes in the church that hinted at secret rooms, and how Father Thornton would sometimes vanish when no church service was going on. Her big chance came during the yearly Lenten retreat in March 1737. Most people from the church were going to special services at the cathedral in Annapolis. Father Thornton said St. Bartholomew would be closed for cleaning and repairs during the 3-day retreat. That gave Isabella the perfect window to snoop around. But first, she had to make sure Father Thornton couldn't hurt her or her family without triggering a mess he couldn't control. Isabella came up with a smart plan that even a military general would admire. She wrote a detailed letter explaining everything she suspected about the Thorntons, how confessions matched his sermons, how the confession booths were strange, and how he had scared her during their private meeting. She made many copies of the letter and set it up so they'd be sent to Bishop Carroll in Baltimore, the governor of Maryland, and her cousin Thomas Ashford, who was a judge in Annapolis. If anything bad happened to her, she gave the letters to a trusted family servant with clear instructions. Send them right away if she didn't come back by a certain day, or if something bad happened to her or her parents. This dead man switch meant Father Thornton couldn't mess with her without starting a full investigation. With that protection set up, Isabella went ahead with her secret mission on the second night of the Lenten retreat. She had borrowed keys to the church from her friend Margaret Whitmore, who helped clean the church and had access to everything. What Isabella found in the basement was worse than she imagined. The locked room under the confessionals was like a spying headquarters. The walls had metal tubes that carried sound from upstairs. A setup of curved metal parts made voices echo clearly. But what really shocked her were the hundreds of coded papers in wooden cabinets, confession notes going back almost 3 years, sorted by church and with names on each one. Isabella spent hours reading through the files, and with every page she got more scared. These papers had not just confessions, but full profiles of victims, notes about blackmail payments, and letters between the 3 Thornton priests about growing their operation in Maryland and even into Virginia. One folder had weird symbols on it. Inside, there was a list of names, people who had become a problem for the Thorntons, and Isabella's heart dropped when she realized some of them had died in strange ways in the past 2 years. Deaths that everyone had thought were natural might have been something far worse. The scariest file of all was a detailed plan the Thorntons called the Final Solution. A huge plan to grow the blackmail network so big that it would reach every Catholic church in the Chesapeake area. They wanted to control the colony's money and politics by using church secrets. Isabella took pictures of the important files using an old-school camera trick she had learned from her science studies. But just then, she heard footsteps upstairs and froze. Father Thornton was back from the retreat early. She could hear him coming straight for the basement stairs. Isabella quickly blew out her candle and hid behind one of the cabinets. Through a tiny gap she watched as Father Thornton walked in like he'd done it 100 times before. He checked the tubes, read through some of the latest transcripts, and then he did something that confirmed her worst fears. He opened a locked drawer and took out a tiny glass bottle filled with white powder. Isabella stared in horror as he carefully poured some of the powder into another small container, then sealed both bottles and put them back in the drawer. Even in the dim light, she knew what it was. Her studies in medicine and chemistry told her clearly. It was arsenic, that deadly poison people called inheritance powder because it was often used to quietly get rid of relatives. Father Thornton stayed down there for almost an hour, reading files and writing notes in his secret code book. When he finally left and locked the door behind him, Isabella stayed, hidden for another full hour before she dared to move. Her mission had done more than just prove the blackmail ring was real. She now knew the Thorntons were ready to kill to keep it going. The next morning, she got her letters back from the servant and added more pages, descriptions of what she saw in the basement, especially the part about the poison. Then she had to make a tough call. Should she try to get even more proof to make sure the Thorntons went to jail, or should she sound the alarm now to stop a murder before it happened? She didn't get to decide, because that same day, she heard that Richard Whitmore had suddenly gotten very sick after taking communion. Sunday Mass. His symptoms were exactly what you'd expect from arsenic poisoning. As Whitmore lay dying at home, with a doctor saying it was some strange fever, Isabella realized the Thorntons had started killing people who might expose them. She now had less than a day to blow the whistle on the whole thing before more people ended up dead. The Thorntons had been doing this for almost 3 years, and they had backup plans that Isabella hadn't even seen yet. She was starting to understand when she woke up the next morning and saw 2 men watching her house from across the street. She knew right away her own life was now in real danger. The big showdown between Isabella Ashford and the Thornton group was going to test not just how smart and brave she was, but whether she was willing to risk everything, even her own life, to stop a crime ring from taking control of all the Catholics in colonial Maryland. That morning, March 15th, 1737, was gray and cold in Havenwood, with thick fog rolling in from the Chesapeake Bay. The fog made everything quiet and blurred the lines between the sky and the ground. Isabella stood by her bedroom window, watching those 2 men who hadn't left all night. She could see their breath in the cold air as they pretended to chat casually. But they never stopped staring at the Ashford house. Richard Whitmore had died during the night, his last hours full of pain, showing every sign of arsenic poisoning. But Dr. Benjamin Crawford, the town doctor, had called it a bad fever by mistake. Isabella knew better. Whitmore's death was both a message and a warning. The Thorntons were willing to kill anyone who got in their way, and she knew she would be next if she didn't act fast. But she had stayed up all night, working out a plan to take them down, a plan that would either destroy the Thorntons or at least reveal their crime so loudly that even killing her wouldn't hide the truth. The trick was to use the one weakness they had. They were so sure no one would believe a young woman accusing important priests. 8 o'clock that morning, Isabella walked out of her house and marched right up to the 2 men watching her. They were caught off guard just long enough for her to speak first. "Please tell Father Thornton," she said, loud enough for nearby neighbors to hear, "that Miss Ashford wants to talk with him right away about her recent spiritual concerns. Let him know I've got some papers he'll really want to see, and I'm ready to talk about giving them back." The men looked at each other, confused. After a quiet chat between them, one walked off towards St. Bartholomew's, while the other kept his eyes on Isabella. Father Thornton's answer came within an hour. He would meet Isabella at 2 o'clock that afternoon, inside the church sanctuary. He said it was for spiritual counseling since she might be grieving over Richard Whitmore. The location was just what Isabella needed. The church's acoustics were perfect. Every word would carry clearly to the secret witnesses she'd placed inside. Those witnesses included her cousin, Thomas Ashford, the judge from Annapolis, who came that morning after she sent him an urgent message. Also there was Dr. Benjamin Crawford, who still couldn't explain the strange illness that killed Whitmore. And Margaret Whitmore, who was grieving her husband but agreed to help Isabella because she suspected those monthly payments had something to do with his death. But the most important witness of all was Bishop Carroll himself. He had come from Baltimore after getting Isabella's detailed letter about what the Thornton priests were doing. At first, he didn't believe it. Accusing 3 of his own priests was serious, but Isabella's evidence was so solid that he decided to come see for himself. At exactly 2 o'clock, Isabella walked into the sanctuary and saw Father Thornton already there, standing. At the altar, his usual kind look was gone. Now he looked cold and dangerous. The soft afternoon light through the plain windows cast long shadows across the pews. It felt more like a courtroom than a church. "Miss Ashford," Father Thornton said, his voice echoing through the church, "I hear you've got concerns about certain church matters you'd like to talk about." "Yes, I do, Father," Isabella replied, making sure she stood where her voice could be heard by everyone listening. I've found out that you and your nephews have been running a criminal scheme. You're using confessions to blackmail people, and even committing murder." The priest's fake, kind face finally dropped. Now he looked like the schemer he truly was. "Those are serious claims, Miss Ashford," he said. "I hope you've got real proof." "I do," Isabella answered, holding up a folder. "I have confession transcripts from your basement. I have coded letters between you and your nephews, talking about blackmail money and expanding your plan to 16 more churches. And I saw you handling arsenic in that basement, the same place where Richard Whitmore confessed, and the same man who died last night from arsenic poisoning." Father Thornton narrowed his eyes. He realized she knew way too much. "Miss Ashford," he said, "you've walked into something far bigger than your little mind can grasp." "Then explain it to me, Father," she said, not backing down at all. "Tell me how blackmail and murder serve God's will." Father Thornton stepped closer, towering over her, his shadow falling across her like a cloak. "The Catholic Church in Maryland," he said, "only exists because the Protestant leaders let it. They'd destroy us if they had the chance. We've built a system to protect our faith, one that keeps our richest people loyal. If they help the church, we protect them. If they don't, they pay the price for turning against us." "You mean," Isabella said, "they get murdered if they stop paying you?" "I mean," Father Thornton replied, "that God works in mysterious ways." Richard Whitmore started asking questions. He wanted to know where his donations were going. He became a threat to everything we've built. Isabella felt a chill as she realized that Father Thornton was basically confessing to murder, like he thought she wouldn't live long enough to repeat it. But what he didn't know was that every word he said was being heard by Bishop Carroll and all the hidden witnesses in the church. "And what about me, Father?" Isabella asked. "Am I also a threat to your operation?" Father Thornton's smile was honestly terrifying. "Miss Ashford, you're just an unmarried young woman, making wild accusations about respected priests. Who would believe you? Even if you said all this in public, people would think it's just a crazy story from a troubled girl. But luckily for us both, that won't be necessary," he said with a cold calm. "Because you plan to kill me too?" "Because you're going to take it all back," he said, "and destroy all the proof you think you've found. You see, my dear, we know all about your late-night visit to the church basement. We know you snuck into God's house and stole private church records. Even worse, we have people who say they saw you in Richard Whitmore's house the night he died, and we have proof that you owned arsenic for your chemistry studies." Isabella felt like a trap had snapped shut around her. The Thorntons had planned ahead for this exact thing. They were ready to blame her for Whitmore's murder. "Even if they don't charge you with murder," Father Thornton went on, "this scandal will ruin your family's name. Your father's business will fall apart. Your fiancé, Jonathan Pierce, will call off the wedding, and your family will be shunned by everyone decent. All that could be avoided if you just admit that your story was made up. Say it was all emotional stress after Richard's death." "And if I say no?" Isabella asked. Father Thornton looked genuinely sad, like he wished he didn't have to say what came next. "Then I'm afraid you'll be found dead tomorrow morning, having taken your own life out of guilt for blaming innocent priests and feeling bad for killing poor Richard Whitmore. Suicide is a grave sin," he added, "but God forgives people who lose their minds from wickedness." Isabella knew this was the final test. not just of her bravery, but of her belief in justice. Father Thornton had shown his whole hand, how far he'd go, even to murder, to keep power. But he was only this bold because he thought she'd never survive to tell anyone. You made one big mistake, Father Thornton, Isabella said, her voice loud and clear across the church. You thought I came here all alone and unprepared. Father Thornton blinked, his confidence suddenly shaking. A little. Then Isabella raised her voice even louder. Bishop Carroll, Magistrate Ashford, Dr. Crawford. I hope you've all heard enough to understand the awful scheme we're up against. Father Thornton went pale as Bishop Carroll stepped out from behind the altar, followed by Thomas Ashford and the others. The priest looked toward the doors, but he saw they were blocked by armed guards. Thomas Ashford had placed them there just in case. Thomas Thornton, Bishop Carroll said firmly, his voice full of authority and anger. By the power given to me by the Holy Catholic Church, I remove you from the priesthood. You are excommunicated for the terrible things you've done to our people. Magistrate Ashford. This man is now under arrest. But Father Thornton wasn't giving up that easily. As Thomas Ashford came forward with handcuffs, the ex-priest suddenly ran toward a cabinet by the altar. Isabella instantly knew he must have hidden a weapon there. The final moment was about to decide everything. Would Isabella stop a killer or let him escape? A loud gunshot echoed through the church like a thundercl, then silence. So quiet, Isabella could hear her heart beating. Father Thornton lay still on the floor. Right in front of the altar, a small knife was beside his hand, shining in the sunlight. Magistrate. Ashford stood over him, his pistol still smoking. He made his choice. The magistrate said quietly, God help his soul. After Thornton died, the big investigation began. And it showed the full horror of the secret network that had been hiding behind the church for nearly 4 years. When the magistrate's men searched the basements of St. Bartholomew's, St. Michael's, and St. Joseph's, they found all kinds of proof of the blackmail operation. The priests had used people's confessions against them to scare them, shame them, and take their money through lies. The papers they found at the 3 churches showed a criminal group as organized as any gang the Thornton network had detailed. Files on over 2,000 Maryland families. They knew everything, who they were friends with, how much money they had, what secrets they kept. The Thorntons weren't just blackmailing people. They were also cheating on taxes, lying to customs officers, and worst of all, they had probably murdered at least 7 people, Marcus and Samuel. Thornton were both arrested at their churches right while they were trying to destroy evidence. At first, they both pretended they didn't know what their uncle had done. They said they thought it was all a secret church system to help parishioners, but the letters found in their churches told a completely different story. The brothers had helped plan the blackmail, and they knew about the murders, done to keep everything quiet. The Thornton trials became the biggest news in all of colonial Maryland. People came from far away, from Philadelphia, Charleston, and beyond just to watch the trial unfold. During the trial, it became clear just how deep the Thorntons had gone. They had used people's private confessions to control business deals, to influence politics, and to control the richest Catholic families in the colony. Dr. Benjamin Crawford's testimony was especially powerful. He told the court that 4 other patients he had treated in the past 2 years had shown the same symptoms as Richard Whitmore's final illness. All 4 had given money to their churches regularly, and all died after feeling really worried about their spiritual health, digging up and checking. Their bodies later showed they were slowly poisoned with arsenic. Emotional shock to Maryland's Catholics was just heartbreaking. Finding out that 3 priests had broken the sacred trust of confession to hurt people destroyed the faith that kept the community strong. Many families just stopped going to Mass. Others told Bishop Carroll to make new rules so this would never happen again. The money side of it was a mess too. The Thornton blackmail ring had made £12,000. In 4 years, a huge amount back then, and they'd use that money to buy land and investments. Getting that stolen money back and sharing it fairly became a long legal fight that lasted nearly 10 years. Isabella Ashford's brave actions made her both a hero and a troublemaker. Some people praised her for being smart and brave. Others said she went too far, and that a young lady shouldn't have gotten into such dangerous things. This argument showed the bigger issue back then. People weren't sure what women should or shouldn't do, or how far someone should go when their conscience and their religion clash. The Thornton scandal caused ripples far beyond Maryland. Protestants started trusting Catholics even less. It gave fuel to people who said Catholics shouldn't be allowed to hold power in the colonies. These arguments kept going for many years, even into the Revolution and beyond, and they shaped big questions about freedom of religion and church versus state. Bishop Carroll made big changes after that. He started checking all church building projects, rotated priests between churches regularly, and made new money rules for the church. But the bigger issue, how to stop abuse without ruining the help priests give, wasn't something anyone could fix easily. The secret changes the Thorntons made inside the churches were all removed, but the buildings stayed standing and in use. They were now sad reminders of how far that evil had gone. Bartholomew's kept serving the Havenwood folks, but people felt weird about confession for years after. Marcus Thornton was hanged in spring 1738 after being found guilty of murder and blackmail. Samuel Thornton got life in prison because he was younger and played a smaller part. But he died less than 2 years later under strange and suspicious conditions. The bigger meaning of what the Thorntons did kept echoing across American history. The case was used again and again when people talked about church freedom, about holding priests accountable, and what rules should exist between church and law. Experts brought up the Thornton case when arguing about church secrets, and when government should step in if religion gets misused. Isabella Ashford did marry Jonathan Pierce, just like she had planned, but the wedding was delayed for almost a year while the trials happened and things settled. She never talked in public about what she did, but letters found after she died in 1782 showed that she still carried the pain of what happened with the Thorntons. In one letter to her cousin in 1745, she wrote, "Sometimes I wonder if telling the truth was worth it. So many people died. So many lost their faith. But then I think about Richard Whitmore's awful death, and I know we had to fight evil, no matter the cost." The story of the Thornton family's crimes reminds us that evil can hide anywhere, even in the most trusted places. And justice often hurts the ones who fight for it most. Out in Maryland's tobacco fields, under St. Bartholomew's bell tower, that courage is still remembered. It reminds us that no power, religious or not, should ever get away with betrayal. Maybe the scariest part of this story is not what we found out, but what's still hidden. Some of the secret papers from the churches mentioned other networks in Virginia, Pennsylvania, and the Carolinas, suggesting that Maryland's case was just one piece of something much bigger. Even after deep investigations, none of those other groups were ever found, and that makes historians wonder how many more secrets might be buried under the oldest churches in America. The last thing written in Father Thornton's journal, found months later when his code was cracked, was one single creepy line: "The harvest is vast, but the workers are few." Did he just say that to sound dramatic? Or was he talking about other people who escaped punishment and kept the plan going? No one knows for sure. And that mystery still gives people chills. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything came out in the end? Or do you think more secrets are still hidden under old churches? Leave a comment down below and tell us what you think about the Thornton case. If you liked this spooky story from colonial America and want more like it, hit the subscribe button, tap the bell icon, and share this video with someone who loves creepy history. There are a lot of secrets in the past, And we're just getting started. See you next time when we uncover another dark story history almost buried.